Welcome back to Excel again, and today we're going to talk about graphing and graphing data. And you may ask, why do we graph data, right? Why do we look at data and why do we graph that data? If we look, here is an example set of data that we might have, right? If we look at this, it's got some values down this column here, 1 through 17 of data points. We've got some load that we're putting on. We've got some length that's doing something, stress and strain, whatever those are, kind of things. But if I look at this data, it really doesn't tell me much, right? I can't tell really what's going on with this data. But what I can do is I can plot it, right? I can put it on a graph, or in Excel they sometimes call it a chart. And if I do that, I will get something that looks like this. This is what we call a stress-strain curve. Right? And this stress-strain curve tells us a lot about material properties is what it really does. But we couldn't tell that by just looking at this data here. We really, by looking at this graph, we can tell a lot what's going on. We see a linear portion, then something happens and it kind of dies down on us. Right, so what we're looking for is a relationship between some independent variable. In this case, it is our length that's changing here, and then our stress. Our stress and strain is what we're looking at. We typically look between our independent and dependent variables. Sometimes we use it to predict results, helps us predict results on things and things like that. So those are some good reasons why we graph things. What we'll do today is look at different topics of graphing. One part is just to kind of look at the different parts of a graph, and I'm sure this is just a basic review for everybody. Everybody's graphed things before many, many times, and you know the basic parts. I just want to let you know what I will be looking for in your graphs also. And then we'll look at the different types of graphs that Excel can do for us, from pie charts, line charts, something called scatter plots, a lot of different types of charts. And then finally, we will actually create these charts using Excel. Okay, let's start by looking at the different parts of a graph or chart. Here is a basic graph that we have. It's something of voltage versus time. And let's look at all the different parts of this. First, we see some descriptive title, right? That's telling us what this graph is about, this voltage versus time. So you must have some descriptive title on your graphs, right? On the sides, you will see your axes are labeled both with units. So here we have time and second and voltage meter, right? So these are our axes. They need to be labeled. And also we need to have an appropriate range of values, right? I don't know if you were like me, but in grade school and things, when we graphed things by hand and by paper, I really hated trying to figure out that range. Usually I made the range too big, and then my graph was way over here, just some small little thing. Or I made it too small, and then it kind of just fit over here. It didn't fit all the way on, and I couldn't see all the rest of the data. Excel's wonderful that way. You can easily change the data, so maybe you only want to look at a portion of this chart, or you can look at the whole thing like as being shown here. Other parts, we'll have grid lines, and there's different ways of turning on these grid lines, both vertical and horizontal. This one's just showing major grid lines, but you could have minor grid lines in between or none at all. Legend, so we have here different voltages, voltage 1 and 2. It's color coded. If you only have one graph in there, you wouldn't necessarily need a legend, but that is part if we have multiple lines going on. The other thing that's very key, and I'll be looking for this on your graphs and things, is to make sure you have a name and date. That is extremely important because a lot of times in engineering we will be taking data, and we may take data today, and then we'll take data tomorrow and the next day on something, and then when we go back to look at it, we want to find out what these trends are doing over time. And if we don't save this data with a date, we may get confused on what really was going on. So it's always important to save your information with your name and date. And your name needs to be on it so others that are other engineers or other people looking at your data can go back and ask you questions if necessary. Other parts of the graph as far as Excel goes, this is the entire graph area. This whole outside box is the graph area. The part with the grid lines in it is our plot area. And what else do we have? Data points. This one isn't showing all the actual individual data points. It's showing a connection of the line and kind of smoothing it out for us. But the data points will be shown in the graph also. Okay, so those are the basic parts of a graph or a chart. Now let's look at the different types of graphs that we have available to us through Excel. All right, let's look at these types. The first thing we want to look at is that Excel can produce 11 different types of charts or graphs. And with these we have a number of different ones. And in business, and most commonly used types in business are your column or bar chart, pie charts, line graphs, and then there's also something called scatter graphs. And scatter graphs are primarily used by engineers, although we may use some of the other ones, and business may also use scatter graphs, but we will use scatter graphs probably 80 to 90% of the time, right? So a significant portion of our time, that's supposed to be an 80% of our time will be used using scatter graphs. And we'll talk about what those are. The first one I want to look at, though, is this column or bar chart. And if we look at this, this is an example of some Tea Time Chocolate Biscuits Company looking at their first quarter sales results. And we see cases sold, and we have a legend which indicates the different people within the company and how they did in January, February, and March. And it kind of gives us a comparison of each person to each other. So it shows some categorized data, and we can compare with each person in each of the quarters, or each of the months, excuse me. Notice there's no name or date. That would be bad. We need to make sure that all graphs have names and dates. Another type is a column bar chart, this way where it's stacked. The stacking shows the relationship of the individual items as part of a whole. So if we're looking at fruit sold in Utah, Washington, Oregon, and Montana, we can see the relationship of each per state who sells the most fruit overall. We see Utah is much larger. And if we look at this, we can see how these fruits compare in the total of the state. So if we look at Utah, it looks about a third each. In Washington, we see that oranges are very, very small, and then apples are much larger, and pears are somewhere in between there. It's odd that maybe they're sold there, not produced there, I would think. I don't know. Oranges being produced in Washington and Utah and Oregon and Montana, that seems so odd. So these must be sold values or something, or whatever it is. But you can kind of see some relationship between these. Again, also notice no name or date on here. That would also be wrong. But again, these stacked ones really just show the relationship within each of the columns as a whole. Pie charts are similar that way. It really is showing a relationship to a whole thing. So this is sales, lunch sales, right, at a shop, right? And it's saying that 40% of their sales are due to sandwiches, is the largest portion, and that's showing that in this part of our chart. Then we go down to salads are next, soup, beverages, and desserts. Soup, actually, and desserts are the same, and beverages are last. It's not saying what profit comes from each, it's just saying the gross sales of each. So kind of as a representation of all those need to be added up, and they should equal 100. Again, no name or date. That is wrong. Make sure yours has a name and date on it. Another type is a line chart. Okay, so this is looking back at this Tea Time Chocolate Biscuit Company, and here we have a line chart, and this chart kind of shows the relationship between each of these people. It kind of really shows us more of our trends in the data, right? We see this trend of increasing sales from January to February, and then kind of coming down in March, right? If we look at this and compare it with our bar chart that we had before, we kind of see the same relationship a little bit, but this one kind of tells us more the relationship between each other, right? Here they're all about the same. Here there's some differences. Here we can see some differences. This kind of shows our trend, right, of the overall group. Yes, you can get the same information from both. You can see this trend here. You can see the differences between everybody here and here. But one emphasizes more than the other. So this one on the left, the line one, kind of shows us trends from quarter to quarter, and the other one, or month to month, and the other one kind of shows more the differences between the individuals. The last one that I want to talk about again is this one of a scatter plot. And this scatter plot is different than the line charts in that the x and y relationship are plotted on the graph, and the line graphs don't have to have this relationship, or that they're independent of each other. The data doesn't have to be uniformly spaced on the x-axis. That's the beauty of it, right? This could be 30. This one could be like 37.5, and this could be 37.9. In a line chart, it would be 37, 38, 39, and so on. And we know when taking data, right, if I'm taking something with a stopwatch, I'm not going to stop it at, 35 seconds. I'm going to stop it at 35.5 seconds or something like that. It'll be a little bit off, and then I can do my reading at that time. So these scatter plots are very important to us. This one's showing it without any connected lines. There are ways to show it with connected lines, right, as a graph. And we'll look at all that in a minute. Okay, and speaking of that, let's look at creating our graphs themselves. Okay, and I think the best way to do this is by looking at an example. And this spreadsheet is on the class page. You can go into the Excel section and find it in the graph section of Excel and run along with the example as we're doing it in class right now or on your own. This example is looking at a velocity equation, and I just made this one up. It's just the velocity equals 10 times the cosine of 3x plus 10x, where x is equal to time and v is our velocity in meters per second. And what we want to do is we want to plot something going from 0 to 10 seconds in 1 second increments. All right. So I'm going to go through first the graphs, creating it in the slide presentation, and then I'll actually go through it as an example. So what we will do is we will create this equation, and we can put this equation right into this cell here and then copy it down. And you'll see we have our time starting out at 0, going up to 10. It's always good to use 0 anyways, just to see what happens with our result. And if we look at it, we know the cosine of 0 is 1, and 0 times 10 is 0. So 1 times 10, this should equal 10, and it does, right? And we'll do that in Excel also to see what happens. Okay. So first we create this table, and that's very important. And it's always good to have the left column be your independent variable, which is your x-axis, and this is your dependent variable, which is your y-axis. Your x goes horizontal, your y goes vertical, right? So in our case, we will have time, and time is usually an x-axis type thing, and v is our velocity on the y-axis. Okay, so let's take that information. We can highlight our data and go to Insert on the ribbon, and when we go to Insert, we will find Charts. Go over to the Chart section, and we can pick all different types of charts: column charts, line charts, pie charts, bar charts, area charts. We didn't talk about like area chart, stock, and all those things. But here's the one that we really like, is the scatter plot, right? The scatter diagram. And we can pick that one, and we have different ways. We can pick it with no connection of points. We can do straight lines. Here's connecting it and smoothing it out without the actual points shown. Here's just straight lines going through it all, and then without it. So it gives us an example of each one of those. After we do that, we can look at our data and click on our data in here and decide what we want to do with it, right? We can move it to another sheet if we want, or we can keep it on the same sheet. We'll look at that. We can change the layout of it by changing and there's multiple ways of doing this, and we'll look at it. You'll see this is our initial one, and from here we've added in some linear relationship. We've added in some lines in here in our grid lines. We've made it into a bar chart. Here's an area chart. So there's different types of charts we can change it to. We can also click anywhere on the chart that we want to format, and then this will display our chart tools. And on the design tab, we can do chart layouts, which is very nice. This design tab up there on the ribbon is really good, and the charts layout group is really good to use. And we'll look at that. And there's many different ways of doing this. So here's our initial graph. From here, we're going to our chart layouts, and you'll see I'm going to select this one, which is nice because it gives us something for the x-axis and y-axis, right? We already have a title on there and a legend if we want. So I click that, and you'll see that it creates both the x and y axis for it. And we can rename those if we want. We change those titles. We can change the type of line that we have. We can change the background that we have, and just keep changing our design. And I'm going to go through all this. So in this chart, in our design ribbon, in this chart tool, you'll see we have layout here. We can change the legend, where it's located, the grid lines, things like that. So I remove the legend. I'm going to add in my titles here. And I've added in grid lines now. I can put in a text box. And the text box is very handy. That's what gives us our name. We can put our name and date in it. Okay? Let's look at this example in a minute, but let's first run through that first example. Okay, here we are in Excel. We're going to run through this example. So first we're going to put in our time, and we wanted to go from 0 to 10 in 1 second increments. So there's our values, and we're going to use this equation. This equals 10 times the cosine of 3 times x, and x is our time, close parentheses, plus 10 times our time. Okay, if I hit enter, again it's 10, which is very nice. Drag that down, helps us copy it, check it over. Yep, looks good, right? We can check other values and really find out what the results are. So here is our data that we've created, and now we want to plot this data. Okay. Anything else I wanted to say about this before we go on? With this equation here, you could have broken it out into smaller components like I've talked about before. This one was easy enough to put into one and easy enough to check that I left it this way. If it was more complicated, I would break it out into smaller components. Okay, let's move this out of the way for us. And let's look at going to insert. We're going to create a graph of this. Go to insert. I'm going to highlight this again. And you'll see in this section all the different types of charts that we have. If I click on this See All Charts, you'll see I have all these different charts, right? Here's the cluster one, these bar ones. Here's a scatter one. Here's our, these are all recommended. Let's look at all the charts. This is a little better. Column, and it's actually going to show us the data as we have it, right? Here's our plot, bar chart, line, so there's a line chart. What we want though is scatter, right? And this is what we're going to want, this scatter here. And we could pick scatter with lines, scatter just with lines like that, and that's what we want to pick is that one. Say OK, boom, there's our chart. Now there's many ways of dealing with this chart. One thing I wanted to point out is I can move it, right? I can move or copy here. I can move chart. If I click on move chart, I can move this to another sheet or leave where it is. I'm just going to leave it where it is. But that is how you would move it. In Excel, there's many ways of modifying these charts. One is to use this in the ribbon and use the chart tools, and you'll see design. And from design, we have quick layouts, was what I used before. And you can see if I go over it, it quickly adds in the axis. If I go to different ones, it does all different things for us, right? Puts data points on, puts it down below, all these different ones. The other thing I can do is I can also click on this plus sign, and you can see I can add different things. I can add just my access titles by clicking on it, right? Or taking them off, right? I can add a legend if I want to take it off. I'm going to use the quick charts here and do this real quickly and put it on. I want to change the title of this. This is going to be my time and in seconds. This is going to be velocity in meters per second. Right. I don't want this legend. There's a number of ways of getting rid of it. I could just hit delete if I want, like that, and it will go away. I could have also gone in here and gone to legend and taken it off. Either way is fine. There's also other ways up here, format, I think it's back here, add elements, right here it is also legend. None, right, top, bottom, all sorts of things. So this is really handy also, this add elements. If I look at that, I can add axes to it, my titles, which I already have. Here's other title options that you can do. You can do fills, all sorts of things, how you want to set it up. So I like using this, and I like using this also. Let's go back in this again. If I just click on it, you'll see it goes right to design. I can change colors of this graphs, right? If I pull this down, I could go to a blue, I could change it more to a red, or I could change to a darker color like this. Maybe I want to change this line. If I click on it, I can change that also. So I can make that orange if I want, like that. There's all sorts of things you can do. Shape effects, I can make it glow if I want, right? Make a nice, somewhat glowy line if I want. So you can always play around with this, and I would recommend doing that. The one thing that you still need to put in here, though, is the one thing I mentioned was to add in your name, right? And if we go over here, so I'm in format, and you'll see right up in here under insert shapes is text box. If I click on that, highlight this area, and I type my name, John Klinger, and today's date is August 20th, 2018, or whatever it is, right? Highlighted, I don't like it in black right now. I'm going to change the color of it to white. And it's not showing everything because that. And maybe I need to reduce the size of it a little. Right? And I can move this text box around if I want. There. So you need to make sure your name and date are on there. So that's how we deal with these graphs. So, and one other thing we can look at are the grid lines if we want. Grid lines, you'll see I can add primary, and these are the minor ones on each. So you can do that also. The other thing you can do is, let's say I want to only look at part of this graph. That's kind of fun to look at also. If I click on this and I right click, I'm going to click on Format Axis, and you'll see I have my bounds, which means that's how far it's looking. I only want to go to maybe 4, right, instead of 12, right? So there's 4, and let me click on this one, and that one's 120, and let's say I only want to go to 60. So there's just a close-up of part of my graph if I want that, right? Here's what it originally was. So then I went to 40 by just that section. So you can zoom in and look at it, or by changing your ranges or having it show everything. Okay, so the best way to work on this is to just really play around with it. Now let's go on and look at some other types of charts that we have. Okay, I want to bring up the other types of charts that Excel also offers for us. The scatter plot is by far the most used, but we also could use column graphs. So if I have this data in here of modes of transportation to work and the number of people that do it, right? I've got walking, take a bus, a train, a car, a taxi, and so on, right? And I want to represent this data in some type of graph or chart, right? I can go to a column chart and I can show it as a column chart where I've got the number of people doing a walk, bus, train, ride, car, whatever, and I have some bar chart. And this is a 3D one we can look at. I can, of course, change the color of it, how it looks. I can put axis onto my titles, my name and date. You know, all those important things need to be on my chart. I took off this legend and made, because there's only one thing on there, that's people, right? So I can change that then. Once I've done that, I can make it into a pie chart. I can change the layout of pie charts. These are real easy. I'll look at and show you how to do that also in an example. We can even, what's nice is pull out sections. So if I'm really interested in one section, let's say the car, I can pull that out for emphasis so I know that that's what I'm talking about or want to show. Or I can separate everything so everyone can clearly see all the different parts of the pie chart. Okay. The best thing is in Excel, and we'll go through examples of this real quickly, but the best thing is to always experiment in Excel. There's always an undo button if you don't like it. There's the help if you want help on anything. So just play with it, experiment with it to get it the way that you want it to work. Let's take a look though real quickly in Excel on how to create these charts. Okay, so here we are with our chart. I'm going to create that chart. To create that chart, I'm going to go to Insert. Up here, I'm just having it, I don't even have it highlighted, I just have the word walk on that section put up there. I'm going to create bar chart. I'm going to create a 3D bar chart. Boom, there we go. This one didn't put a legend in for me, that's fine. I can go here and add in my axes for this. This is transportation. This is number of people. And then we have number of people, we have transportation versus number of people. And there's my chart. Very simple, easy to do. I can easily modify this chart, of course. I can change the way it looks, right? There's all these different ways to make it look, depending what I want. I can change colors of this thing, right? I can make it green, I can make it purple. Let's go purple. It doesn't want to change it right now. I can change just one if I want, right? I can change, oh, it's in that grouping, that's why. Here's a different grouping. There's all these different groupings of colors. So here's all the purple ones, if I want purple. Again, the layout's similar type of thing I can change. I can also change the type of graph that I have. So here's the change type. And I don't want this anymore. I want a pie one. And you'll see it's giving me our transportation. It's showing it as an example, right? And I could change it in 2D, 3D, whatever. I can pull things out differently. I'm just going to pick a regular one like this. So there is my chart. I'm going to also insert, I didn't put this in the other one, but I'm going to put my name and date, right? That can always be inserted in here. And in here you'll see I don't have any data or anything. So let's edit this thing, right? Let's design this. Let's look at what we can do. Data labels, right? So I can look at the different types in where I want it located. So those are labels. Here's a nice way to look at it. So I can call it out by section, the type and the percentage. It's usually what we do. I don't really want the number because that usually doesn't mean as much in a pie chart, but by percentage is nice. So let's do that. Let's move these in. That's with a call out. Let's change this. I don't really want the call out itself. Let's take data labels off. And let's see if it gives us other options. There's percent. I kind of like this one. That gives us the different I like this one. I'm going to change our color to something like that. This is kind of nice because it gives us a legend over here and the different types. But you see, one thing I don't like is that 3% is kind of small for us, right? I'm going to see if I can shrink this thing a little bit. Oh, maybe it won't allow me. But I don't like this 3, so I'm going to pull the 3 off a little bit so I can have more room for my data. So there's one way of doing that, right? I could leave these percentages on and change those off. What if I wanted to look at the car one, right, and say that's the one I want to emphasize? I can pull that out. I just clicked on it once and then clicked on it twice. Control Z brings it back. So if I go back here again, I'm going to shrink this a little bit. That's better for me. Again, Control Z if you don't like what you have. There we go. And you can see that oh, that's nice. It has this little arrow that goes to it. So if I click once and I pull out now, right? If I pull out, you will see each section pulls out, right? If I click once, all right, so let's go somewhere else. Click once, click again a second time, I can pull out 1. And a second time, pull out 1. So maybe I just want to emphasize those. So those are ways of kind of moving the chart out. You see that I can separate it all. And if you play around with it, you can do however you want with it. Okay. So there's pie chart. There was the bar chart. Again, there's all the other types of charts that we have, right? We can change to these types of charts, line, column, all those different ones. So there we go. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Contact me. ask me in class, and I'd be happy to help you. Hope this works out for you. Again, if you have questions, please let me know. Have a great day.